Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be answering some of your questions. So this video is part of a kind of two-part Q&A that I'm doing in celebration of 9 years on Booktube and reaching 30,000 subscribers. So I will leave the first video linked down below where I talked about classics and reading habits and various books. But today I'm going to be answering some more questions, some about writing, some about work, some about studying, some about other things. So let's get into them. And I'll start off with some writing questions. Someone asked me, what inspired you to write your own books? So I don't really remember like a specific point when I was inspired to write my own books because I've been writing for a really long time. I first wrote a novel, finished a book when I was 12, and like it was 50,000 words of nonsense, but I did reach the end of the nonsensical story that I was working on, and I used to write short stories and try to write novels before then. I was definitely trying to write novels when I was in primary school. I guess I just always loved reading books and loved books, and therefore like writing books seemed like a very sensible thing to do. I used to write plays as well. In fact, I first finished a play when I was like 9 or 10 years old. I don't know how long the play was. Like on reflection, if I went back to the play, it would actually only be like 20 minutes long. I don't know, but I got to the end of the story. So I guess I just been writing for like a long time. I didn't really make like a conscious decision to start writing, or if I did, I was so young that I don't remember that. I guess when I was a kid, I used to play a lot of like make-believe games, and my brother and I used to draw like really big maps of these other worlds that we had created, these fantasy worlds, and I used to make up games and stories in my head about what the characters we made up were doing in the worlds we'd made up. And when I got older and we kind of stopped playing those make-believe games, then I just wrote them down instead of playing them. You know, even before I started like writing stuff down on paper or on a computer, I used to write a lot of stories in my head. Like I would have a novel going in my head that I was writing, and I would like sit there and think, and I would get to the end of a chapter, and then the next time I had time to think, I'd just like start the next chapter in my head and just like write it in my head. I've always done that. In fact, I do that less now that I write more actual writing. I don't write in my head as much, but I still do that sometimes. Like if I can't go to sleep or whatever, then I usually try and write a chapter in my head. So I guess the answer to that question is I don't really think anything specifically inspired me to write my own books. I guess I have just always been writing stories in one way or another. Someone asked me, when you're writing your novels, do you write longhand or on the computer, and what program do you use? Are you on PC or Mac? So I write on a computer. I never write longhand. I have terrible handwriting and I type much faster than I can write by hand. As I said in answer to the last question, the first time I finished a novel, I was 12. I have to say finish a novel in a silly voice because it was so bad. Like I haven't looked at it for a long time, but if I did, it would be so bad. Anyway, but even my earliest attempts at writing were mostly done on computer. Like I write first thing in the morning, and I've been writing first thing in the morning for a really long time. And actually, if I look back on it, the reason why I write first thing in the morning was because when I was 13 or 14 and decided that I wanted to write every day, the time when the family computer was not in use by anyone else was at 6:30 in the morning, so that was my writing time. I write and have always written in Microsoft Word, which I find easy and straightforward, and I don't really want anything more complicated. I usually have a plot spreadsheet in Microsoft Excel as well, but my main writing tool is Microsoft Word. My current computer is a Mac. I did used to have a PC. Basically, I think I'd always had a PC laptop until I went freelance 2 years ago, and I decided to get a Mac because I thought it would be worth investing in a slightly more expensive computer that would last longer. And I had problems on my previous laptop with large PDFs, which is something you work with a lot if you're a proofreader, and also sometimes with video editing. And I thought a Mac might be better for that. So I've had a MacBook for probably about 2.5 years now, and I like it a lot. I feel like most of the previous laptops I had did not last for 2.5 years, or like half lasted. My previous laptop, the screen broke before everything else, so I could use the laptop if I plugged it into a monitor, but if you opened the laptop, the pixels all shook at you in very bright lights and it was very unpleasant to look at. So yeah. So far, my MacBook is doing pretty well. I had quite a few questions about like whether I outline or structure a story before I start writing, and also how I go about outlining and writing, like whether I write a book in order and that kind of thing. So I very rarely just start writing and see what happens. I'm usually someone who has a plot sort of planned out before I go, you know, scene by scene, bullet points. Saying that, my most recent novel, The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hearst, was a bit of an exception. I've been working on this on and off for a really long time, and the first draft I didn't plan because I started writing it intending it to be a short story. That did not happen. So this was initially written without a plan, but then I like planned it a lot in the editing, if that makes sense. I had a lot of plans for my edits, but in general I tend to plan out before I start writing, scene by scene, point by point. There's a great online course from Writers HQ called Plotstormers, which takes you through step by step kind of how to plan, outline a novel. I'd really recommend it if anyone is writing and wants to learn how to outline, because it's very, very useful. When it comes to the first draft, I always write in sequence. I write the first scene and then I write the next scene and then I write the next scene. I have never understood how some people write books out of order. I just don't think my mind works like that at all. And also I feel like if you did that, then you would write all the scenes you wanted to write first, and then how would you write the bits in between that you were struggling with? I feel like the best way to motivate myself to get through a scene that I'm really struggling with is to think about the next scene and how that will be a lot easier to write. So yeah, I always write in order. I don't necessarily edit in order though. I probably often do edit and rewrite in order, but if I know there's like a particular element that needs work or rewriting, sometimes I will do that out of order, but then I'll always like read through the book as a whole and make smaller edits after I've done an edit that might be a bit more patchy, if that makes sense. Someone asked me about like character sheets. I never do a character sheet or anything like that. I usually have a like dramatis personae document, but usually that's just literally a list of like names and ages and maybe jobs and how they're related to other people. The Plotstormers course, which I've already mentioned, does have some good like character exercises, which I've sometimes done for some books, but not all books. Usually though, when it comes to writing characters, that sort of happens naturally as I write the story. The thing that I plan much more is the plot, because that's the thing I find hardest. Sometimes if I'm struggling with a minor character or a side character, I write a short story about them. That's something I find really helpful for like getting to grips with a character. So I have a short story on my computer from the perspective of Paul from The Secrets of Hartwood Hall when I was trying to develop him as a character. I've got a short story about Major Alderton from The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hearst. And then someone also asked me about like how I keep track of timelines and stuff like that. And that is what Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets or whatever is for. I love spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are great. I feel like for some people, the idea of using a spreadsheet to help you write your novel seems very unartistic, but like a spreadsheet is so useful. I often have a spreadsheet for my books, and the spreadsheet will have like little scene summary or whatever, but also the timeline, what date it is, what day of the week, what time, that kind of thing. Spreadsheets are exceptionally useful for timelines. Then I had two questions about writing retellings. Someone asked me, have you ever thought of taking a classic novel and translating the characters and plot into a modern setting? And someone else asked me, is there a character from a classic novel you'd like to write a sequel or prequel about? And I found this a really fun question, and I feel like I have quite a lot to say, because I have definitely done some stuff with retellings in the past. So my two novels that are published are obviously not retellings, but they do have like inspiration from classic books. And I feel like one of the reasons why I kind of like have found that so fun and kind of got into that was because I used to write quite a lot of retellings when I was younger. So I have on my computer 70,000 words, so like quite a lot of words, of a modern retelling of The Netherworld by George Gissing that I wrote when I was 20 and never finished. Basically, when I was studying The Netherworld at university, I just felt that it felt still really relevant. So I decided to write my own modern version of The Netherworld. I think it was called Another Netherworld. And I really enjoyed writing that. I had lots of fun with it. I didn't finish it. I can't think how far through the story I got, probably about halfway through, I guess. I don't know that I'm hugely likely to ever do anything with it. Aside from anything else, I feel like The Netherworld is not a famous enough classic that you could market a retelling of it. I guess maybe you could if you didn't say much about the fact it was retelling, but there we go. I also think the problem with writing a modern retelling, and in fact the problem of writing anything set in the modern world, is that it ages really fast. So that Netherworld retelling, I was writing it I guess in like 2013, and it starts in 2010 and like moves forward through the years as the original book does. And quite a lot of it was about the recession and about kind of the aftermath of the recession. So it was quite like rooted in 2010, and I just feel like that would feel less topical today if I were to ever do anything else with it. And I don't think I probably will anyway, but I had a lot of fun translating the characters into the modern world. Actually, I did kind of do one thing with one character from that book. So in the Netherworld, there's a character called Penelope, but everyone calls her Pennyloaf. That's the food she lives off. It's the cheap food that she can get. And in my version of the Netherworld, the version of Penelope, Pennyloaf, was called Molly, but everyone called her Morley's. Morley's is a fried chicken chain in London. And I did actually end up writing a short story called Chicken Shop Girl about that character. I mean, I had taken her out of the Netherworld, like, story, but that was the initial spark for that short story, and that short story that I wrote a few years later was shortlisted for a competition and stuff, so I guess something did come of my Netherworld retelling, but I don't think I'll ever go back to it. Talking of short stories, actually, I also wrote a short story called Headstone about Bradley Headstone from our mutual friend, from his perspective, which was shortlisted for the Dickens Bicentenary Short Story Competition back when I was a student. That was a short story competition for short stories inspired by Dickens, and you can read that online, actually. I think it's still published on their website, so I'll leave that down below. I would not read that short story unless you have read Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens, because it contains all the spoilers, and I also don't think it would make that much sense. And then also when I was at uni, I used to write lots of like retelling poems. Like I had a series of poems I wrote that was all about like minor characters from literature, which I really enjoyed. And then I've saved the best till last. When I was doing my master's in creative writing, I wrote 44,000 words of a modern retelling of Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I think I wrote about 20,000 words of it in like a few days. Basically, it was November and I just started my creative writing masters, and I read Sense and Sensibility by Joanna Trollope, which is a modern retelling of Sense and Sensibility. And I just thought it didn't work. Like, I just felt like she hadn't changed enough to make it work. And I thought, maybe I could do better. And it was November, it was NaNoWriMo, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to write a Sense Sensibility retelling for NaNoWriMo. And then I started and I wrote quite a bit of it. And then I realised that I was doing a master's in creative writing and this was definitely not going to be my main project and that I should be focusing on other things. And I put it to the side. And then basically over the next like year or two, every now and then, if I needed like a palette cleanser writing exercise, I would like write another scene for my modern retelling of Sense Sensibility. So I have a modern retelling of Sense Sensibility half written. Will I ever finish it? Possibly not. I don't know. I think part of the problem is again, when something is set in the modern world, it ages so fast. Like, I went back to it the other day and it's just very 2014. Like, I can't even explain exactly what it is about it that's just very 2014, but it's just very 2014. Also, the main characters are 17 and 19 years old, as they are in Sense and Sensibility, and I feel like when I was 21, I was much better at writing 17 and 19-year-olds than I would be now. And I knew much more about what it was like to be that age at that point in time. Maybe one day I will return to my modern retelling of Sense and Sensibility. I don't know. That's been a long answer to that question, but I thought you might find this stuff entertaining. Another question I had was, do you ever think you'll try a different genre for your writing? So for now, I feel like I'm fairly settled in historical fiction. I really like writing about the past because I find history fascinating, and especially the Victorian period I find really, really interesting, and I have like a lot to say about it and a lot of ideas for it. And also, you know, as I said, if you write stuff set in the modern world, it ages so fast. However, within historical fiction, I have obviously moved around genre a little bit. My first book is very much more sort of gothic, and my second book is much more like comedy of manners. They're quite different in style, and the book I'm writing at the moment is also quite different in subgenre. Still historical, still Victorian, but otherwise quite different. I think for a while I'll probably like write a few different kind of genres, but all within historical fiction. In terms of outside of historical fiction, as I have said, I have written stuff set in the present day before, and I also wrote quite a bit of fantasy as a teenager. I don't know whether I would go back to fantasy, maybe one day, and I probably will at some point write some stuff set in the present. Like, there's plenty of stuff I would be interested in writing set in the present. Also, as an editor, I've worked on a lot of like commercial women's fiction and rom-coms over my time in publishing, and I really enjoy them, and that's something I would potentially be interested in writing, possibly, but, you know, I love historical fiction a lot, and that's good for now. Another question I had was, how does it feel after publishing 2 books and doing well? Do you feel momentum? Do you feel like it was or wasn't what you wanted it to be? Are there new things you'd like to try? I feel like that's a very big, deep and meaningful question. Publishing a book is definitely an odd experience, and I think, you know, it took me a very long time to get published, and I think that's the case for a lot of authors. And if you have been trying to get published for a long time, and if it's been your dream for a very long time, I feel like it's very hard for it not to be a slight anticlimax, which isn't to say that it hasn't been hugely exciting and hugely rewarding and wonderful and like had so many amazing highlights. But being an author is also a very like messy, difficult, unstable career. You know, most authors are on a 1-book or a 2-book deal, so you don't actually have that much certainty about your career. You don't know whether you'll be recontracted, you don't know whether you'll continue to be published. And you know, the market is quite tough right now with the economic climate being what it is. Hardbacks are not selling very well in the UK right now because hardbacks are expensive. But you know, it's very hard to be successful as an author, and it often takes a really long time. And I think because it's really difficult to get an agent and because it's really difficult to get published, sometimes writers and readers don't realise how difficult it is to succeed as an author or how difficult it is to stay published. You know, if an author publishes 1 or 2 books and then no more books, that might be because they haven't written anymore, but it might also be because they're struggling to get published because their first books didn't do that well. It is very tough and competitive to get published, but it is also very tough and competitive to stay published. I know it's a really cliche metaphor, but I feel like getting a book published is like you climbed a really, really tall mountain and you got to the top and you were so excited that you got to the top, and then you realised there was like another massive mountain that you couldn't see because it was hidden behind the clouds, and then you have to climb the next one. And I think there are a few things, you know, my first novel, The Secrets of Hartwood, was published both in the UK and in the US, but my second novel, The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hearst, has only been published in the UK. I haven't managed to get a US publisher for that book, and that like has knocked my confidence a bit, which is silly because I really wasn't expecting a US publisher for my first book, and if I hadn't got a US publisher for either, then I wouldn't have been surprised, but I think it was because I got a US deal for the first book and then not for the second, and I personally think the second's better, so I just feel like that has been a bit of a knock. But you know, on the flip side, The Secrets of Hartwood was shortlisted for a prize for the Historical Writers Association Debut Crown Award, which I did not expect at all. Like, I wasn't expecting any prize, you know, nominations, longlist, shortlist, whatever. So that was really, really cool and surprising. And, you know, I feel like most of the time I don't feel like I'm a proper author. I feel like the authors whose books I edit, they're proper authors, and I'm just like, not. Like, I find it hard to imagine that I am an author in the same way. But then, you know, stuff happens like, I spoke about in my publication week vlog for Montgomery Hearst. I went into the independent bookshop in Harrogate and they had done Hartwood Hall for their book club like the week before, and I was like, oh, I am an author. I don't know, every now and then I'm like, oh yes, this feels real, and most of the rest of the time I'm like, oh well, we'll see. That was a very rambly, messy answer, wasn't it? But anyway, let's move on. I have some questions about editing and freelancing and that kind of thing. So someone asked me how I got into editing and proofreading. So at university I studied history and English literature, so, you know, humanity stuff, and then I did an MA in creative writing after uni, which actually, on reflection, was useful for my writing, but was also hugely useful for my editing. While I was at university, I decided that I wanted to be a literary agent. I think basically because I had been researching how to get published for my own writing, I kind of learned a lot about what literary agents did, and I thought it sounded like something maybe I would like to do. So I did some work experience at literary agencies while I was at uni. Basically what I would do in my university summers was spend like half of it working paid work and half of it doing literary agent work experience. And then when I was finishing up my masters, I applied for various like internships and schemes with publishers and literary agencies, and didn't get them, but I ended up getting a temporary job working at Foyle's bookshop in the web orders team. So I processed online orders for Foyle's as a Christmas temp for 4 months, which was really fun. And that was a temporary job, and I knew it was a temporary job. So while I was kind of coming to the end of that, I was looking for internships and jobs in publishing, and I got an internship at a very small non-fiction publisher. I was an intern, unpaid, for, I guess, a month, and at the end of that I was offered a job. I think I was editorial and marketing assistant, and then was kind of promoted to assistant editor 6 months in, and then after that I moved to a bigger non-fiction publisher and edited antiques guides, which was great fun, and then after that I managed to move into fiction, which had always been my goal. I knew by that point that I didn't really want to be a literary agent because I wanted to edit, not to do the sales kind of side of things. But I knew I wanted to work in fiction. So after applying to many, many jobs and really struggling to move over into fiction, I did manage to move over into fiction. And I actually think my Booktube channel was really helpful for that, because I think it was a good way of me showing that I really, really loved fiction, and that I had the editorial skills, like technical editorial skills from non-fiction, but I also had the market knowledge from all the reading I did for Booktube. So I'm very grateful to Booktube for that as well, I guess. And yeah, I worked in-house as a fiction editor for several years at 2 different publishers, and then I went freelance 2 years ago. And now I work as a freelance editor, copy editor, and proofreader, and I really like it. I like it more than being in-house. Taken me a long time to get to the career that I actually always wanted, though I didn't know I wanted, but here I am being a freelance editor, and I really like it a lot. Someone asked me, when you edit someone else's novel, is it printed or on the computer? It is always on the computer. I never work in hard copy, and I think hardly anyone does. How exactly I'm editing a book on a computer will depend on what stage the book is at. So if I'm doing a structural edit, I might have some comments on the manuscript or some notes in track changes, but mostly I will be writing an editorial letter in Microsoft Word with my bigger editorial notes. If I'm doing a line edit, I usually have a shorter editorial letter, but most of the work is done in track changes in Microsoft Word. If I'm doing a copy edit, again, that's in Microsoft Word with track changes and comments, and I produce a style guide and a query document as well. I often plot out the timeline in Excel because I find that a bit easier, but I usually copy it back into Microsoft Word just so it's all in one document. If I'm doing proofreading, I will be doing that on the PDF, working in Adobe using markup and comments. Interestingly, when I started working in publishing, editing and copy editing was pretty much all done in Microsoft Word with track changes, but proofreading was still majority done on hard copy, and we would send out hard copy proofs and a proofreader would mark them up and post them back to us. But since COVID and lockdown, there has been a massive shift to digital proofreading, and now if a publisher asks me to do a proofread, the assumption is always that I'll be doing it digitally, and that's fine for me. I like proofreading digitally. As I said earlier, I have terrible handwriting, so I think my corrections are much better done on a screen than they would be if I was marking them up by hand. When I started working in publishing, if you wanted to be an editor, you had to learn all the proofreading marks, and that was like an important part of your starting career in publishing, and now like that just isn't really necessary, and that's just shifted in the last like 5 to 10 years. Kind of moving slightly away from freelance editing but still talking a bit about work. Someone asked, I've always wondered what a day in your life looks like and if they're all structured and organized, or if you follow your vibe through a day. So I think at some point I'm going to try and do a like day in the life vlog, where I like talk you through what my day as a freelance editor looks like. I can't really vlog like the actual work I'm doing, but I can like talk you through how I spend my day and the different sections of my day. I feel like when I first went freelance, I thought I would have a much more like structured day, and I like wrote myself a schedule and so on, but I actually never follow that schedule. I have a like daily to-do list, and my to-do list often includes like do 6 hours of copy editing or whatever. It is a mix of I know I have to do this work today and vibes. I always start the day by writing for like 1 to 3 hours depending on what else I'm doing, and then I do editorial freelance work and I fit Booktube in somewhere. I think I will do a vlog at some point and talk you through what I do in a day. One question I enjoyed was, what do you write in forms under occupation? So if I'm called upon to say what I do for a living or what I do as a job, I will always say editor or maybe freelance editor if that's relevant. I never say that I am an author, even though obviously that is also my job. I guess because editing is the main like thing I spend my work time doing, and also that is what I consider to be my career. Like I do have a career as a writer. Being an author is a career and I want to make a career of it, but it's only kind of like recently become a job, and being an editor has been my career for like a longer time. You know, if I'm like, I don't know, at a party and someone asks me what I do for a living, I'm always like, I'm a freelance editor. And then usually if like a friend or Nick is with me, they'll be like, and an author, but I would never say that myself. I think partly because if you say you're an author, then they're like, oh, well, I've heard of your book, and then you say your book title and they're like, no, I haven't heard of that, and then they feel awkward even though it's not awkward. I don't mind if people haven't heard of my book, but anyway, that probably does depend on like where I am and the context. I feel like if I'm at a book launch and someone's like, what do you do, I would probably say I'm an editor and an author. Like if I'm in a authory space, then I will probably be more likely to talk about my books. But in general, yes, I'm much more likely to say I'm an editor than I am to say I'm an author. Someone asked, could you tell us more about your time at Durham and your course? So yeah, I went to Durham University a whole decade ago now, and I studied English literature and history, joint honours, which I really enjoyed doing. I'm so glad I did joint honours. It was so fun, and I loved, yeah, doing some English literature, doing some history. I did some great modules in both. I also tried to combine them where possible. level. In the English literature half of my degree, I studied a lot of 19th and 20th century literature and incorporated lots of historical context into my essays. And in the history half of my degree, I wrote an essay on the history of reading and literature in the Victorian period. And I also wrote an essay on how A Tale of Two Cities interprets the French Revolution and what that can tell us about historiography and interpretations of the French Revolution during the Victorian period. That was great. I really loved doing joint honours, and I feel like there were enough modules that I would have very happily done a whole history degree and a whole English degree rather than half and half. And then, yeah, when I wasn't studying, I spent lots of time at Creative Writing Society, and I also was in a few bands. I played the trumpet. Well, I used to play the trumpet. I haven't played the trumpet in 10 years. And I also co-wrote and helped produce some plays. That was quite fun. I spent lots of time drinking tea in cafes. Reynolds was my favourite, and yeah, I just had a good time in Durham. Durham was great. Someone else asked, any thoughts on doing a PhD? So theoretically I would love to, but I don't think I will actually ever do a PhD, unless it was in creative writing, specifically for the purpose of teaching creative writing. But even then, I feel like that's not hugely likely, but I feel like that's more plausible to be in my future in 30 years than doing a PhD in Victorian literature, which a bit of me would love to do, but I actually think I wouldn't really love to do. I feel like academia is just too academic for me. History in academia gets very, very specific and narrow. You have to really, really specialise on one thing. And when it comes to English literature in academia, I feel like there's a lot of space for analysis and no space for love. That was the one thing I did find when I was studying English literature at uni, is that yes, sometimes I want to sit there and analyse Dickens's meaning and his sentences, but I also want space to be I love Dickens, Dickens is great, and talk about how much I love Dickens. And I feel like there isn't space for that in academia at the undergrad level. Maybe there is further down the line, I don't know, but I never felt like there was the space for the love of literature. And I feel like one of the things I love so much about Booktube is that I can do analytical videos, and I do analytical videos, but also there's just a lot of space for love and for enjoyment and finding fun in books. Saying that, I do have some really good ideas for a PhD in Victorian literature were I to ever do one, and I won't ever do one, but I quite like coming up with potential PhD titles and themes. So actually, maybe this Victober I'll do a video of 5 hypothetical Victorian literature PhDs I could do, which I will never do, but I will find interesting to talk about why it would be an interesting thing to do a PhD on. I found this next question entertaining. Someone asked me, how do you always deliver your video content so precisely and accurately without ums, ahs and pauses? Do you make notes or read them from a screen or a prompter? I do not deliver my video content accurately without ums, ahs and pauses. I edit my videos a lot. I edit out all the ums and ahs and all the pauses and all the times that I say the same sentence 17 times before I get it right. I will find some good clip from this video where I have tried to say the same sentence 10 times until I can get it right, and I will put that in here so you can see how it sounds, so you can see how my filming goes, so you can see how oh my god, it's just happened right now. What was I actually saying? I cannot get my words out. This is why I don't do very many live shows, because I'm so terrified that everyone will realise I'm really inarticulate. Which is silly, because I have done podcasts and stuff, and I've done, live events and Q&As for writing. And I feel fairly confident in that kind of setting. I also digitally slow myself down because I talk very fast, and I'm aware that I talk very fast, and I have tried very hard to talk slower, but I do not think I'm physically capable of talking more slowly. I have tried so hard and it doesn't work, so I just literally slow myself down instead. I would say that if I film for an hour, that turns into a half-hour video, and that's even considering I slow my videos down to 85%, so think about how much that means I cut out of a video. In fact, I'll tell you, I'll put on the screen here how long this video was unedited, and you can see obviously how long it is edited. When it comes to making notes or reading things from a screen or a prompter or anything like that, I often have my laptop by my camera while I film. I'll put in the photos so you can see my setup. My laptop is currently positioned on top of some books on top of my piano stool for my keyboard. So if you see me looking down in this direction, I'm reading something or looking at something on my screen. But I don't really script videos exactly. I make notes and I plan videos in advance, and there are some videos that have a lot more detailed plans than others. A more analytical video like, I don't know, my video Let's Talk About Mrs. Jennings, or my Mega Dickens read-along reflections videos. For those kind of videos, I will make a lot of notes and I will have like several pages of notes. It's not fully scripted, not everything is in full sentences, but it is getting towards that, and there are some sentences that are in full, so it's like, I don't know, half scripted, I guess. But if I'm doing like a TBR or a wrap-up, then that's not scripted at all. I may have some notes, but my notes will be like a list of books, and that's all. So it really depends on the video I'm doing. I'm very pleased that people think my content feels precise and accurate, because believe me, unedited, it is very much not. And then finally, my last question for my Q&A, someone asked me, do you imagine yourself ever quitting YouTube? So not really. I mean, I've been doing it for 9 years and I'm still going, and I think I started off on 1 video a week, but I've been doing 2 videos a week for a really, really long time now. When I started Booktube, I was 22 years old. I was doing my master's, so you know, I was still in education. So I've been doing Booktube for like the whole of my adult life, including like some times when I was very, very busy and stressed and struggling, but I still managed to keep doing Booktube, and Booktube was always like a help in those times. I feel like when people do leave Booktube or YouTube, and when they talk about like why they're doing so, the reasons they give for leaving Booktube are not reasons I have ever experienced in my time on Booktube. Booktube has only ever added to the joy of reading for me, and I never find Booktube stressful. I find the schedule and the structure of posting 2 videos a week on the same days every week, like I find that really comforting and lovely. Making Booktube videos like always makes me feel really, really cheerful and happy. You know, I feel like if I'm, you know, in a month or a year where life isn't great, and I sit down to film a Booktube video, I automatically feel like my spirits lift as I start to talk about how much I love books. So I feel like after 9 years of doing that and Booktube always being a sheer joy, I can't really see a time where like Booktube makes me fall out of love with reading, because I just can't see how it would. There is obviously like the time element, like Booktube is really time consuming. But I'm trying really hard to like fold Booktube into my broader freelance career in a way that makes it really sustainable. You know, I started a Patreon a few months ago, and that's very much part of that, like trying to make sure I feel I can give the time to Booktube that I want to give to Booktube. And obviously, you know, who knows? I've been doing this for 9 years, and my life has changed a lot in those 9 years, and who knows what will happen in the next 9 years of my life. And also, you know, maybe the Booktube community will migrate to a new platform, or YouTube will collapse and implode. Every now and then I do look at what has happened to Twitter, now X. You know, what if YouTube got sold off to someone who made it awful? And you know, like maybe everyone will just stop watching. Like, I don't know if I would still make Booktube videos if everyone stopped watching. While I love making videos for making videos, I also love the community, and if there was no community, it wouldn't be the same. I do not currently see myself quitting Booktube anytime soon, because I love it a lot, and it has brought me such joy in life, and such confidence as well. I look back on like my teenage, very early 20s self, and I just had no confidence, and I just really thought I was so boring, and I feel like Booktube has brought me such confidence in terms of, you know, like speaking in public and speaking to people. Having said I'm really inarticulate, you know, I feel like I am much more comfortable, you know, doing author events and that kind of thing, because of Booktube, even if I, you know, heavily edit myself here, but also just in terms of confidence of like believing that like maybe what I have to say might be vaguely interesting. I feel like Booktube has just given me like a lot of confidence that I never ever had. Basically, I love Booktube a lot, which I feel like is a nice way to end this very lengthy, long Q&A. How long will it be once I've edited out all the ramble? I don't know. I'm gonna finish up this Q&A now. I was hoping to film another video now, but I've been talking for so long that I don't think I have time, so I'll have to do that tomorrow. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Do let me know your thoughts down in the comments if you have any other questions. Otherwise, that's all for now. Thanks very much, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.